whenever you're ready to hit that button and to start our slides. That would be great. Thanks so much. I'm gonna fix my screen here momentarily, bear with me. First, a welcome. I'm Nancy O'Neill. I'm the Associate Director of the Kerwin Center for Academic Innovation from the USM. Heather, do you want to say a quick hello?
Sure, I'm Heather Congdon from University of Maryland School of Pharmacy at the UMB campus. I'm also one of the co-directors of the UMB Center for Interprofessional Education, along with Jane Kirschling, she's our director, and Joe Martinez from the School of Medicine, who's our other co-director. Welcome.
Thanks. We're really excited to have all of you here today to kick off our IPE digital badging project. So I'm going to go over the agenda briefly, and then we'll get into some introductions. And then I'm going to turn the controls over to Heather to take us through the first part of sort of our content area for the day. So we're going to start with some introductions, as I mentioned. Heather's going to provide an overview of the work to date, just a brief sort of recap of what we talked about in more detail in our January webinar, with a little bit more focus on kind of the first phase of the work. Then we're going to talk about an exciting opportunity that we have in conjunction with Texas Tech University to begin to use an inventory tool to begin to catalog all of the existing IPE activities that might be happening at your institutions. And that's sort of to lay the groundwork and foundation for eventual badging pathways. We're going to take then a coffee break, get some caffeine and refuel for our last part of the meeting, which will be kind of an introduction to the badging project proper. And then again, with an emphasis on the work that we've done to date to kind of frame it out and talk a little bit about kind of a schema for badging tiers and then kind of across the IPEC competency areas. And then a little bit about some potential shared assessment opportunities that we might conduct, kind of in concert with each other across the project. And then we're going to end up today with a little bit about forming your team. I think we may be at different places with that aspect, and that's okay. Some meeting plans that we have that are kind of take us out through August, and then some immediate next steps for the teams to take on and for Heather and I to take on this spring. So with that, we can go to our introductions. In the email that Annika sent just a few days ago with a reminder about the kickoff, we asked there to be one person from each team to sort of handle the introductions of your colleagues, of you and your colleagues, and to respond to the prompt, what drew you to this project? Because we're really excited to hear about that. So without further ado, I'd like to jump in and start with CCBC. If someone from CCBC might like to take the reins and introduce yourself and your colleagues and talk a little bit about the prompt.
Hi there. So I am not sure why it's not letting me show my camera. It keeps denying me. Let me see, start video. Nope. So my apologies. My name is Stacy Klima, and I am with the Community College of Baltimore County. And essentially, I guess the badging started officially with our committee. We signed a agreement with University System of Maryland to start a badging initiative at the Community College of Baltimore County. So we had a really strong start in 2019. We worked really hard to incorporate elements for the collaborator badge and built both some shells on Blackboard, renowned Brightspace, as well as have an interdisciplinary or interprofessional event with all students coming together. And unfortunately, COVID kind of took a step forward and really hindered our ability to bring the students together in person. We did still kind of persevere, and they worked on their modules, and they had to have a reflective piece that they turned in. So all students initially that had signed up didn't unfortunately complete it because of the stress of dealing with going to a virtual format. But we did have a pretty good turnout otherwise, and we worked with, at that time, it was Portfolium. So from the School of Health Professions, which I dealt with directly, essentially about 16 to 17 students completed the collaborator badge with just our school. And so we're hoping to kind of carry this on and move forward. But I think what we're trying to decide now at the institution is who's going to fund the platform moving forward and what platform we're looking to push. If it's going to be Credly or some other platform for the students to move along with. And I think I guess that's kind of where we're at. We just switched the learning management systems to Brightspace. So that has taken a lot of IT support for the college. And also we have a middle states review that's coming up this next month. So lots of stuff going on. So hopefully we can kind of continue the conversation at CCBC with digital badging. And I really look forward to what everyone has to say today. So thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. Connie, I see that you're here. Other colleagues from CCBC that we want to make sure and recognize?
I think that might be it. We had a couple that were interested, but had, actually we had a few, and I think one is teaching now and a couple had other appointments. They may be joining us later.
No worries. And we're going to talk a little bit about team again formation at the end and sort of the idea of kind of a home team and an away team. So the away team might be joining these central meetings, a smaller set of folks, just to be for the ease of, scheduling and things like that. But we're, imagining that you might want to expand your team for this work back at on campus. And so that would be sort of the away team from the perspective of the central project. No, excuse me, that would be the home team. The away team would be coming to the central meetings. I'm mixing up my own metaphor here. Thanks, Connie. And what's your role at CCBC?
I am a assistant professor in the School of Health Professions for the Respiratory Care Therapy program. So I do a lot of teachings in the health professions here at the college.
And I'm the coordinator of retention activities for the School of Health Professions.
Great, thank you. And colleagues from Coppin, looking around the Zoom room here. Mona?
Hello, everyone. How are you? I am the chairperson for the Health Information Management Program in the College of Health Professions.
And anything about why Coppin had interest in this project?
Well, a couple of years ago, we had started working on interprofessional initiatives and have been doing it, just not in a formal way. And so trying to get back formally into it, because for our profession, health information management, nursing, health sciences, as careers, we collaborate with a lot of people. So it just makes sense to have our students begin to do that as well.
Great, thank you. And other colleagues from Coppin? I don't think so, but I just want to be sure.
I didn't see anyone else's name.
Okay, great. Telson, someone would like to introduce the team?
Yes, thank you. I'm Tab Urich. I'm Associate Dean at the College of Health Professions, and I'm overseeing IPE in our college. So I'm excited by this initiative. I'm joined by our #1 champion, Dean Plowfield, who can't join us today, but she's very much a part of our, let's say at least the away team in her nonetheless absence today. I'm also joined by the other Associate Dean of our college, Dr. Gerald Jerome. He's not charged with IPE oversight, but he's going to have a key perspective and a different lens. So I'm looking forward to his expertise. And I'm joined with 2 of our IPE champions, Dr. Beth Cruz. Beth Cruz is a clinical associate professor from the Department of Nursing and currently serving as the assistant chair. I'm also joined by, our team is joined by Dr. Jennifer Wingrat, assistant professor from Department of Occupational Therapy and the chair of our campus-wide community of practice that includes interprofessional and interdisciplinary collaborations. We're excited to have been invited to this initiative. And I guess I'll start from a personal standpoint, drawing to the project. I was handed this opportunity to oversee IPE in our longtime associate dean Marcy Weinstein's presence or absence into retirement. So I got that, and I quickly realized that IPE is not just a really good idea, but I saw that it's tied to accreditation standards for many of our programs. So that was key. I also, strangely and unrelated, got assigned to be part of some pilot badging attempts at Towson as part of USM's goal to encourage badging across the institutions. And when this came about, I thought this is a wonderful tie to kind of piece two things that were really important but fully disconnected. So I'm hoping that this kind of serves as an opportunity, not just to help Towson and digital badging, but selfishly and more important, provides a structured framework that's really absent from IPE in our college. So I'm excited about this, and thanks for having us.
Thanks, Tab. UMB, Heather, maybe we'll have you go at the end and talk a little bit about why UMB is interested in this, because then you can just segue to the next segment. So let's go to UMBC.
Hi, so I'm Dana Bradley. I'm the Dean of the Erickson School of Aging Studies. So this is not about aging, the longevity economy. This is not about one school or college at UMBC. And so I think I've got Katie Berger is here. I'm looking, who else is here? There's, and Susan Rio is here as well. And apologies, I'm looking on my small screen, right? So I may have missed some of my UMBC colleagues. We were really intrigued about this. And so I stepped forward on behalf of the Leadership Council to be at this group, to be with you, to think seriously about how we might do this in each of our institutions. So this is, from UMBC perspective, this is not about an entity, a department or a college. It's about how we can leverage our resources to meet workforce demands, right? And you guys know we are on top of that, as many of you are across these institutions, and to really motivate our faculty to think about ways that are different, to thinking about their own work. And so I have to tell you personally, so I'm here because it's the right thing to do. And tag, it's not like tag I'm it, but also I'm missing President's Council, which is our leadership moment this month. And y'all know, Freeman's leaving. So missing the President's Council is a big deal. And that says a lot about what UMBC wants us to be, and be supportive and be part of this larger movement to think about, how do we do this? How does it fit with our accreditation? How does it fit, most importantly, with our student needs across all of the members here? And we also have to think about accreditation, right? So I heard someone mention that not in part of our conversation. How do we make that work, right? So delighted to be here, delighted to have some of our UMBC team here, and we look forward to having more of us where it's appropriate.
Thanks so much, Dana. Yeah, and we're going to be in a mutual sort of collective discovery process, and I think able to really take stock of all the really wonderful work that's already happening and ways to really take it all to the next level. So, and I really am excited about the potential for cross-institutional sharing, insights, and collaboration potentially down the road. UMES.
Yes, hi. My name is Lana Sher. I'm the Assistant Dean for Professional Affairs at UMES. Also an Associate Professor in the School of Pharmacy, Department of Pharmacy Practice. I see on the call with me Dr. Hoyan Trong, my colleague. He's a professor at the School of Pharmacy and the Director of Public Health. I've been in this position since 2017, and I've been working with Hoyan since he was actually in my role from, I believe, to 2013 to 2017. So we work really well together. We do oversee the IPE events at the School of Pharmacy, as well as other health professions on campus at UMES. We do also have a partnership with Salisbury University. So we serve on an interprofessional committee that was founded, I believe, in 2013. So we're really big into IPE. We are looking to collaborate, offer more opportunities for our students, and pretty much like everybody said, elevate, IPE at our institution. So thank you for having us. And I think Hoyan recognized a few faces, and I don't know if you wanted to say anything, Hoyan.
So I just want to say thank you. Excited to be a part of this and give a name pronunciation, guys. You've seen a lot of people. MJ Bishop, I'm sorry you have to hear this again. We've been through this with another committee for health literacy, but I'm Hoyan Trong. The H-O-A-I is pronounced like Hoi, chip ahoy cookie, H-O-Y. And I know it's 2:20 in the afternoon, but I don't have any cookie. I wish we all can be person to share cookie, but a patient gave it to me. They just call me Chip Ahoy, Dr. Chip Ahoy. Because a lot of vowels in there, H-O-A-I-A-N. I've been called Hawaiian, I've been called hotel, I've been called kind of things. So you can call me whatever you want. You call Chip me Ahoy, I will respond. I love chocolate chip cookie, Chip Ahoy. It actually has a meaning. The H-O-A-I means long lasting, and the A-N means peace, so long lasting peace. So I think we need that in the world today, especially in the current environment. It's nice to see some of you. I think so. Heather and I go way back. We used to practice. We both start clinic together. Interprofessional clinic and practice together 2009 when I was faculty at UMB. So it's like 13 years, Heather. And it's nice to see some of you and looking forward to working with you, all of you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really just can only echo how excited I am about our collaboration here. Heather, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself for the purposes of responding to the prompt, and then we'll segue right into the next section.
Sure. So, like I said, my name's Heather Congdon. I'm from University of Maryland, Baltimore. My main base campus is at universities at Shady Grove. And so I kind of, the role of being in the co-director for the Center for Interprofessional Education, and then my role at Shady Grove, I worked a lot with some of the folks there at universities at Shady Grove, and I knew that they were doing some digital badging. So I approached them quite a number of years ago about trying to figure out how to do an IPE badge, and it kind of fell through a little bit with COVID and just things got busy. And then when I reapproached, they put me in contact with MJ and Nancy, and so that was now probably a year or two ago, and so we've been trucking along ever since. So at UMB we have, I would say, a pretty robust interprofessional education operation going on. I'm going to talk about some of the things that we do and as relates to this initiative coming up. But we wanted a way to recognize our students for the work that they're doing in interprofessional education and practice. And so looking at this badging initiative became very desirable. And then some of the other things we're going to talk about today with the inventory also are going to help with that as well. So I'll talk about that in a bit, but that's pretty much why we kind of got interested. We're building all these great opportunities, but we weren't really able to fully capture how the students were being recognized for those activities. And so we wanted to be able to do that in a really thoughtful, methodical way. And so we kind of got to this point. So that's me. And it looks like Nancy and Annika and MJ are gonna introduce themselves as well from the University System of Maryland side.
MJ, do you want to say a quick hi?
Yeah, I'm just along for the ride here, but I'm MJ Bishop. I direct the Kerwin Center for Academic Innovation. Really glad to see this work moving forward. Nancy and Annika and Heather have put in a lot of time over these last couple of years working with a smaller subsection of you all to pull together the framework for this. And it's great to see it expanding and us really starting to push forward on some sort of a pilot. We've done digital badging work since about 2015 in the system. Prior to this, we were doing work with career ready skills mostly for undergraduate students. And I think what we found was, in addition to it being a nice way to recognize the students and their accomplishments, it's a really great way to start to help them connect the dots between all of these diverse experiences they're having and the ways those add up to the things that we want them to come away with thinking about, in this case, interprofessional skills with the career ready skills, the ways in which they were getting critical thinking skills, leadership skills, and so forth. So really exciting to see this work moving forward. And I know I can speak for our chancellor and my boss, Joe Boffman, the senior vice chancellor. They are both very excited about this as well. Jay Perman, of course, has been a huge advocate for the IPE work that has been led across our system institutions. So thanks again. Annika?
Hi everyone, I'm Annika Manny. I'm a principal with EdBridge Partners. We're a consulting firm that supports the Kerwin Center on a variety of projects. We have been working with the Kerwin Center on their Badging Best initiative since 2014-ish, I think, and helping to guide that work and provide support for that work. And we're excited to see this come to fruition as well in the IPE.
So Annika, if you could restart the slides, we'll turn things over to Heather. And we want to leave room for conversation and discussion, questions, things like that. So as questions come up for you or just comments, you're saying, well, I'm wondering how we can connect to that piece, please feel free to put those in the chat and we'll work on addressing those kind of section by section throughout the agenda.
So can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure yeah, okay. So I actually shared my screen. So if questions come up, Nancy, in the chat, make sure to let me know. You can stop me and I'm happy to answer any of those as they come along. The next few slides are actually a little bit of a review from the webinar that we had last month. I know that some of you all attended that, but I know some of you also did not. So I just wanted to kind of lay a little bit of background and piggybacking on what we were just talking about, why we're all here. And just going over a little bit of that base so that we can build from that. So we kind of mentioned some of these things already this morning, that the Kerwin Center has supported digital badging for some time through the BEST initiative. We did talk a little bit about, during our last meeting last month, the informational webinar about a workforce development paper that was entitled Strengthening Maryland's Healthcare Workforce. It was a report that came out in 2018, and one of the items that was in there was to establish Maryland and the system of Maryland as a national leader in IPE, and to ensure our students receive experience that sets them apart from others and high level quality of care because of the IPE model. So if you take those two things and you put them together, you know, we want to be able to be this national leader in IPE, and we do this great job of badging. So we wanted to make it a way to strengthen our competency development as it pertains to IPE. Some of the work to date, to go back, you know, to the agenda, this are all the individuals that formed into a work group from some of the institutions in the University System of Maryland, as well as CCBC. And so these are the individuals that have been meeting, I would say, on and off now for about a year or so, to see if this was going to be a good idea to move forward. And, you know, we decided that it was, and so here we are. But these are the group of individuals, many of them are on this call, that were involved in that introductory group. So in a second, I'm going to have Annika bring up some polling questions. But what I wanted to talk about was a work to date on the digital badge. But I didn't want to get too far into that until I kind of had a better understanding, and Nancy and I had a better understanding of where people are in the world of IPE. So far, what we've done with the IPE digital badging is kind of get a little background information so that we're fully aware and prepared to build a badging system that that makes sense. And so you see a couple different pictures here, just to kind of jog my memory to know what to talk about. But on the bottom right-hand corner, there are buckets. You see 3 buckets, and I'm going to bring these up again a little bit later. Typically, both nationally and internationally, people put interprofessional education activities for students into one of those 3 buckets. The first one is introductory activities. Those are activities where students are just beginning to be exposed to one another in the different fields, especially in the healthcare fields. So they're just learning about, what does my discipline, you know, provide to the team? What do the other disciplines on the team provide to the team? How do I communicate with these other people? You know, those types of soft skills, and just getting to know themselves and the other disciplines. Then there's a next bucket where you take what you learned in that first bucket and you apply it to simulated cases. These could be anything from a case on a piece of paper, to a case with a standardized patient actor, to a case with high fidelity simulation mannequins. But you're practicing what you learned in the first bucket in a safe environment. And then the third bucket is the practice or competence bucket, where you kind of use what you learned in these first two buckets, and you get to the third where you're actually practicing as a team in the patient care arena or client care arena. And so that was used then to look at the next graphic on the left-hand side of the screen, which I know you cannot see, but it's just for illustration purposes. This was from the Center for Interprofessional Education at the University of Toronto. They're very progressive in their interprofessional education and practice, much more so than the United States. They kind of had their stuff together a little bit earlier, and they developed these models by which and frameworks by which to kind of have a stepwise approach to interprofessional education and practice. And so the three green columns are the introductory exposure, then the second is the immersion or simulation development, and then the third is the clinical practice competence. And so what they did was then put these different competency statements under each of those different buckets as the student is progressing through their learning continuum. And then the top right-hand column or picture is from the Interprofessional Education Collaborative, or IPEC. They developed 4 competency statements for interprofessional collaborative practice. And so you can see in the little circle there, there's interprofessional teams and teamwork, interprofessional communication, values and ethics for interprofessional practice, and then roles and responsibilities for interprofessional collaborative practice. So I'm going to kind of get into a little bit more detail about these items in a bit. But one of the things that our group was wondering is how familiar this group of that are here today on this meeting are with those IPEC core competencies for collaborative practice. So do I have to stop sharing, Annika, or can I keep sharing?
I just launched the poll. Are folks seeing the poll? I think they are.
So you can see the question is, how familiar are you with IPEC competencies? You can say not familiar at all, somewhat familiar, or very familiar.
Are folks seeing the poll?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
far 9 people, yeah.
Okay, great.
We'll give a couple more seconds for folks to respond. Okay, so this is good. So we have 3 out of the 12 have said not familiar at all, and that's really important for us to know, because that's a quarter of us that probably need a little bit more information on that. And so I'm going to show you guys something that might help a little bit, especially those that are not at all familiar or just somewhat familiar, that might help you familiarize yourself a little bit more. So I'll show that in just a second. And then we have a couple that are very familiar, and that's great. And so this was good for us to know where we all are. And then you can launch now, Annika, the second question if you want.
Are you seeing that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the second question is, to what extent are your institution's IPE activities already mapped to these competencies? You can either choose not mapped at all, somewhat are mapped, or some are mapped, all are mapped, or not sure. Okay, so it looks like I think 12 answered again. Annika, I can see everybody's responses. Can everybody see that, or do you share like a
Yep, they should be seeing it now. It's sharing the results.
Okay. Yeah, so again, some are not mapped at all. Looks like a handful have some mapped. That's probably where UMB is also. We have some that are mapped, especially our kind of high level ones that come out of our center. All of them being mapped, that's amazing. And so I'm interested to hear about that, because we have a ways to go at UMB to be all mapped. And then many are not sure. And probably that's related to not being super familiar with the competency. So great information to have. And Annika, is that information captured then for us to go back to, or were you able to?
Yes, I believe it will be, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so can I just press stop sharing for that right now, or you will get rid of that? Let me see. There you go. All right, so what I wanted to do is I'm going to bring up this website really quick. You guys can see this now. It says IPEC at the top. Okay, so this is the IPEC Collaborative website, Interprofessional Education Collaborative. So this has the documentation that we were referring to when we were asking those prompts. So the main document was from 2011. This was the original core competencies for interprofessional collaborative practice. It's a fabulous document. I suggest if you're not familiar, or even if you're somewhat familiar, you take a peek at that. If you kind of, I'm just going to scroll down to make you dizzy for a second. The graphic that I had in my PowerPoint is from this document. It has some really good background information, and then it gets into, here's what I wanted to show you. The 4 competency domains are listed here. And then for each competency domain, they have a set of competencies. So here, this is the values and ethics competency domain. There are 10 values and ethics competencies. And then after that, you have the roles and responsibilities domain, and then there are 9 specific competencies under there. So this document goes over all of the competencies, because I'm going to be talking about it in a little bit. So just to put kind of a frame to what I'm going to be talking in a bit, when I talk about competencies, these are what I'm talking about. So under each one of those 4 domains, like the communication one has 8, and then the last one here, teams and teamwork, has 11. So these are the different competencies that the Interprofessional Education Collaborative Group put forth in 2011. Now, since then, in 2016, they did an update. One thing that's important to note, I believe on here, it has all of the institutions. So you can see they have 15 institutions now that participate in this collaborative to be able to put forth competencies surrounding interprofessional education and practice. So they started with 9, and then they added 6 more to have 15 now. So it's a really big group that makes sure that, that they're putting the right information into those competencies. What I can tell you is that right now they're actually talking about reworking the competencies. That's going to probably be another couple years, year or 2 out. So you may see another iteration at some point coming in the future, but these are the documents that are being used now. Are there any questions about those? But I hope that helps, seeing that website, and we can share that website with you all so you can access it down the line. But any quick questions that come up just seeing it for the first time, if it was your first time?
We want to put a link to that in the chat. Not to let people get distracted. But.
Yeah. So this, I just put this out there because when I get to where we are and what we're doing and what we have kind of talked about in that work group, a lot of it started with talking about the buckets, talking about the competencies, and then how to kind of merge that all together to build the badging. So this is kind of the foundation of that. Some other things, these are kind of individual things that happened at the same time. We did write a concept paper with the University System of Maryland on the badging project. We shared it with the provost at all the institutions in the system, and that's kind of how we got folks together for the informational webinar, and then now where we are today. We are currently engaging in a collaboration with Texas Tech University, and I'm going to show you some screenshots from their version of their IPE registry in just a bit, but it's really cool. They're building ours as we speak for us to use as well, and we'll kind of use theirs as a template of what ours will look like so you can see and how we would go about using that. We've also talked a little bit to IPEC, that group that I just mentioned, as well as the National Center for Interprofessional Practice and Education, about endorsement opportunities. So as we move forward with our badging, and as we have a little bit more to show and to these entities, we may be able to pick up some endorsements for our badging as well. And then I have myself on there working with the University System of Maryland with Elkins professorship to devote a good portion of my time to work on this project over the next year or so. So all of these things have kind of been going on behind the scenes. So we're really well poised to move forward right now at this point in time. So the timeline, I think, Nancy, you said you adjusted this a little bit today, right? Based on,
Yeah, just to make it a little less, how did I say it? A little bit more, a little drawn out. I think we took into account some things that we've been talking about in the last couple of weeks, just to make the first section really focus on taking stock. But Heather, I want to turn it back over to you.
okay. So again, if you were at the webinar, this is pretty much the same items in the timeline. You can see pretty much from now until August, we're forming our teams. We're starting to inventory all of the IPE we have going on at all of our participating institutions, and I'll talk about that next. Mapping activities based on our different frameworks that we're going to talk about a little bit later today. And those types of, sharing insights from the inventory, assessment tools we're going to talk about. Nancy's going to talk about a little bit later. So that's kind of the big thrust of what we're doing now, is figuring out what are we all already doing, and going from there. And then from August to December, developing new IPE offering if there's gaps. So one of the things we're going to be able to do with the inventory is, for those 3 buckets that I mentioned that the IPE activities can fall into, you might recognize that you have a whole bunch in one bucket, but none or very few in another bucket. And so we can begin to have those that are lacking in a particular bucket, be able to develop things to meet that specific bucket, do some pilot projects with the badging this fall if you're ready, and then review any results of initial projects that have already been going on. And then later on, I think I'll leave the other part for later, just to continue to build and develop frameworks and assessment modalities for the badging process that we develop. So any questions before I talk about the inventorying tool that we have partnered with Texas Tech University? Is there anything? It looks like, did some things come through the chat, Nancy? Let me see if I can.
Just about sharing the slides afterwards, so we'll certainly do that.
Okay.
Just any questions or reactions at this point?
Tab here. I'm just trying to frame what's coming. Is the inventory, IPE inventory, truly inventory database housing of things, or will it also provide us opportunity to disseminate a digital badge to students who are successful in our pilot?
That's a great question. Heather, you'll get into the inventory in just a minute, but it really is just a database to catalog activities. Now, as I understand it, and Heather, again, you'll be showing some screenshots in a minute, there is a way for a student-facing sort of a portal to it, where it could be a place where students could go to identify activities. So again, if we're working with a group of students in a particular program, and they're ready to move to a simulation level activity that we want to have them try to accomplish this summer, then you could begin to look at the inventory to see things that are sort of key to those specifics. And then of course, there's a faculty and administrator facing view that you'll see things like, you can talk about the assessments that are used, you can talk about the number of students who participate historically, things that students who are looking for opportunities don't need to see. But there is some additional information that's for you all to benefit your development of these activities and the kind of scaffolding of these activities that students might have participated in over time. I put at the end that we'll talk a little bit about, we'll spend a little bit of time this spring working with you team leads at each of the institutions to try to understand if you already have some badging technologies in place. We are not recommending one. We're not having a central one as a pilot. Like we did do that with the career ready skills. And I think we learned some lessons about how that worked out and didn't work out. And so we know some of our institutions already have some existing mechanisms for actually issuing badges to students and kind of capturing students' experiences and learning to be able to look at them and make some meaning as to whether they've achieved a certain level of competency. So we didn't want to go into too much detail about that today, but we will be sort of going, we have a time to talk to each of you as teams this spring. And so we'll ask you in advance to say, talk to your folks in IT and other places on campus that might have some access to these types of technologies. And if you don't, then we can try to talk about what might work for you for the purposes of this project and especially the early pilots.
Nancy, if I could just quick jump in, don't forget, we also, and I mentioned this in the chat, we do have a contract with Credly that allows the institutions to buy in just using an order form to purchase groups of badges. So we can at least cover you that much. As Nancy said, we want to be platform agnostic, but we do want to just, that exists, and that's something you can take advantage of, particularly for these pilots. Sorry to jump in there, Nancy.
No, please do. So there's typically, and some technologies will cover both, but there's typically an electronic platform that helps capture the sort of individual students' package of activities and their results of this, any assessments that you might done along the way, to sort of be able to sort of suggest and signal that they have, yay, you've achieved level one, you've achieved the level 1 badge. Credly will then push the badge out and sort of formally issue it. Students will then claim it, and then they can actually link to it on LinkedIn and other places where they may want to sort of make that public and visible to employers and to graduate programs, or depending on who they are and where they are in their program and in their education. So we do have Credly. There may be a way in which you would like to think about it, exploring a technology to sort of capture the students' experiences going through a pilot, so that you can sort of make some meaning as to whether, when and whether they're reaching competencies across the 3 buckets, the 3 tiers that Heather described. So we will have time to explore that in more depth with each of you this spring. And then when we come back to our first cross-group meeting, we'll share a little bit about what each of you already has at your disposal, because folks who don't have something may want to think about what other people have, just get the ins and outs. And we can also explore whether or not there might be some pilot opportunities that we could at least broker, even if we're not going to run one out of the project.
I think Hoyan has a question. Did you want to ask a question, Hoyan?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I probably asking a question ahead of myself. Just when I saw the activity, I thought it was exciting, the inventory, but I was just wondering, does the activity include assessment? Because I think one of the things, I'm probably preaching the choir, one of the hardest things to do is assessment in IPE, assessment for impact, for outcome, for sustainability. So I'm just wondering if we also doing inventory of assessment activity.
So that's a great question. So Nancy's going to talk a little bit about assessment later in our discussion, but in the inventory, one of the items that is captured is whether or not the activity is currently getting assessed, and if so, what tool or what method is being used to assess. So they're capturing that. One of the things that we wanted to talk about as a group is, well, a couple things. I don't want to take away Nancy's thunder, but we are exploring, are there certain levels where we could use streamlined assessment tools across all institutions? So I'll leave it at that for now, but yes, we have talked about it. And assessment is Nancy's favorite thing. So she's really, I bring the development of activity piece and she brings the assessment piece. So it works really well. But yes, so we are going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later, Hoyan, but absolutely, I agree with you. Assessing IPE is very difficult. So we have thought about some ways that we could probably make that work. Any other questions? You're welcome.
Wait.
Okay. So what I want to do, let me start sharing my screen again. So as I mentioned, right now, Texas Tech is actively building our version of the inventory based off a model of their own. So I'm going to show you some screenshots of theirs from what it will look like from a student perspective. And then I'm going to show you a bulleted list of items that we will be entering, or faculty will be entering from the other side in order to capture that information. So first I'm going to look at the student access side. So when you
Could I also, just real quick, I apologize.
Yeah, sure.
Just going to put a pin in talking about there are some costs associated with this inventory. The Kerwin Center is going to be covering the costs for the first year with an option for the institutions to renew. So we want to make sure that you understand that this is going to be something that's made available to you for free to test, to kick the tires and test out. In the scheme of ed tech, it's quite reasonable because again, it's kind of from a peer institution, not from a sort of place that does this all the time. So I just want to lay the groundwork and say that you'll have an opportunity to kind of get in and use this tool free of charge to your institutions for the folks who are jumping in to the project. So I just wanted to make sure and let you know that.
And by reasonable, we're talking below 3,000, right? 2,000, 3,000, somewhere in there.
It might be closer to like $1,000
Yeah.
a year.
Yeah,
So
very reasonable.
So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to, and I can get the specifics on that. I have it in another set of files, but it's pretty reasonable, I think, in the scheme of things.
Yep, good. So this, when you go to, and you guys can access everything I accessed, is available on their website. So Texas Tech University Office of Interprofessional Education. You can click on a link to access their registry. So ours will likely be similar. There'll be a sign-in. The sign-in is for faculty or administrators. That is the part where you would enter new activities or renew an activity. So they have it where every year you get an email to renew an activity, because we all know that IPE it's hard to sustain. So something might go on for 2 years and then drop off. So you have the option to renew it or, turn it off each year. So that all occurs in this behind the scenes in the sign-in part of it. Then you see this approved activity registry. This is where students or faculty can go to see what other people are doing. So I'm going to pretend that I clicked on this approved activity registry, and that would take me to this screen, which is really kind of cool because you can filter by, you can either search the filter by a keyword, you can search by a location. So for us, that would be UMB, UMES, Towson. You can search by the institution that's offering it. You can search by audience. So let's say a student says, I'm a pharmacy student. I need to know what activities are available to pharmacy students, because I need to know what I have availability to. You can search by that. You can search by which core competency is covered, and we'll kind of get into that in a little bit more detail. And then underneath that, you see at Texas right now, they have 64 current activities that are available to students. So you actually, it shows you the full list, and I'll show you an example in just a second. But you can click a PDF and get everything about a specific activity. So once you filter however you want to filter, you then can click on a link and it'll show you everything about that activity. So if we kind of drill down a little bit deeper, these are those 3 areas. So filter by experience type. Ours is going to be a little bit different. But, because I think we're going to have the different buckets that I mentioned. So exposure, immersion, and competence. But there also will be, is this like a, you can see this as a drag down. So these aren't the only ones that are available, but we've revised ours a little bit based on, our needs. But there's a whole bunch of different types of experiences under the bucket. Then the audience, this would be, it'll have all of our institutions. And then if you click on our institution, your own institution, it'll have all of the disciplines that are able to participate from your institution. So that will all be populated. And then you can also filter, you see here, by the competencies. So is it focused on the communication domain? Is it focused on the roles domain? Maybe it hits 2 of them. So all of this information can be clicked off by the student if they're looking for a particular type of competency to meet a requirement for the badge that they're currently working on. And then for the other side of it, like I said, so after you kind of filter, click on your filters, it'll bring up a list. So let's say 5 things meet my filters. Then for each of those 5 things, like it says the title real big, and then I can click on PDF and it'll PDF the whole activity, all the information for me to know who I need to contact, how often it happens, all the information I'd want to know. So on the flip side, if I'm a faculty member or an administrator that's entering a new activity, these are the types of things that are built into when you enter a new activity. So of course it has a title and a description and all that. The level of interprofessional education and practice. So the 3 buckets, is it an introductory, a simulation, or an immersion activity? When does it occur? Where does it occur? How often does it occur? Is it an annual event? Is it a semesterly elective? Does it happen once a semester? Does it happen? Is it a brown bag that happens every month? So you can enter the frequency it happens. The target audience, that would be where there's a drop down, where there's a drop down for each of our institutions. And then when we click on our own institution, it would list all of the different disciplines. So you can identify who may be eligible. And so one of the things that was kicked around, and we haven't really finished that discussion, is that kind of the 1.0 version would be that we're pretty much going to probably be using our own activities from our own institution for like the pilots and the first running. So if I was a UMB student, I would primarily be using UMB activities to fulfill my badge. But maybe in the future, we can make it such that we can share. And so if I'm a UMB student and I know UMES and Salisbury are doing something really cool over on the Eastern Shore, maybe I could tap into that and vice versa. So there is room for that, moving down the line once we kind of get ourselves up and running and organized, that we might be able to share some of those activities and make it really a system-wide, statewide initiative where we can be accessing each other's activities. And then we have, as you're entering the activity, you would not only click the domain that it applies to, but then I'm going to show you all in a couple slides that we would also drill down to specific competencies, and that we'll have some detail on there about which specific competencies are required to complete the badge. So I'm going to get into more detail about that in a second. Of course, there's contact information for who's kind of in charge of the activity. There's also, it doesn't say on here, Hoyan, but there is questions about assessment on there. Assessment, yes or no. And then there's some open-ended about if there's a particular tool, you can upload the tool. If there's not a particular tool, you can answer like a checkbox on what type of assessment it is. And then there's, sources of funding if applicable as well. And so what Nancy was mentioning before, we're hoping that the student-facing side, they don't need to know all that about funding. They don't need to necessarily know about all the assessment stuff. So there will be a student-facing side that just includes the information about the activity, and then the back-end side where we can put in more of that other information that the faculty and administrators are more interested in. Let's see. We're not having coffee yet. So I guess I wanted to just get to this point first, and for the registry, a couple things. A, they're actively building ours now. B, I believe that later on Nancy's going to talk about a time when we actually want to have a separate meeting that just addresses the registry. Is this correct, Nancy?
Yeah, so the way I see this is we're going to test out one iteration of this. We're building it largely on what Texas Tech has. They've kicked the tires on this for several years now, and they have a pretty comprehensive inventory. We didn't want to mess with it too much, partly because there's a sort of, I don't know if I would call it a parent-child relationship, but we're connected to their inventory and the basic structure. And so we can't mess too much with it. But I went through and looked at the assessment options, because there's a bunch of options you can choose, and I added some because I think there were some more things there than available than what I saw there. We didn't really take things away. But we will have built into our contract with them the ability to do modifications every year. And so if we go through this and you're saying, this is good, but we don't have a place where we can capture X, we can go back to them. So, I want to assure you all that this is going to be a process by which there'll be lots of input from this group as to what this sort of looks like in the end. But we're starting out with trusting our colleagues at Texas Tech that they've worked out a lot of the rest and have a good set of items that they're asking and showcasing for their own activities. And then we'll have the opportunity to really take stock of how it works in the first year and then see if there are modifications that we then want to make. Was that not the question that you asked, Heather? Or was
Yeah,
that...
and I think we were going to have a separate meeting where we just go over, maybe even with IT folks from your all institutions to make sure that we all properly know how to use the tool to inventory all of our activities on our campuses.
Right. So we already know from all of you what your single sign-on integration mechanism is. And that's the extent of my technical knowledge, but it's basically the way for it to create an easy interface that's a UMB interface or UMES interface kind of within this, so that your folks who have the proper credentials can sign in and put stuff into the inventory. So we'll want to have a meeting, I'd say probably in a month or so, with a key person in your IT who speaks the language of single sign-on integration and who can talk to the people at Texas Tech and UMB who speak that same language and can make it all work. And then we'll see if we want to also have that be for all of you to sort of walk through the inventory as well, or if we want to, we'll decide. I want to see how much that sort of entails. That may be its own meeting, and then we may do a walkthrough demo when we have it kind of more operational for this group potentially. So we can be flexible on that and do whatever makes sense for all of you to sort of get yourselves, familiarized with it. And then you'll be starting to put things in, so you'll get familiar with it in that way as well. And
Tab, I see you have, I see Tab has a question. Go ahead, and then I have one more thing I want to mention about the abilities of the registry.
Oh, thank you. So I have two questions. The first one is, it was really helpful that you said for this starting off of the kickoff and the pilot, we'll be using IPE activities from our own institutions. So I wondered if we would each get our own database IPE registry, but then you said they are actually building ours now. So will there be one that the USM gets and all of us are sharing it?
So I'm going to try to do my best to talk the tech like Nancy was trying. As I understand it, there will be a link that we click on to go to the registry. Once you go to the registry, there's going to be an icon with each of our institutions for the single sign-on process. So you click on your institution, enter your credentials. Once you're approved, you go back to this registry that's encompassing all of our institutions. So the single sign-on will, for a second, take you out just to like get you back in, but everyone is on the same registry. And the way that if I understand, anything that's entered will be entered by institution. So then if I'm a student or a faculty and I want to know what's going on at my institution, I'm checking UMB, I will pull up only UMB stuff, right?
Oh, so our students could see really cool things going elsewhere and know they don't have access to it.
Yeah.
No, they can't.
I think what I understand is that so UMB students would click on a UMB instance of it. Essentially, it just is the database itself is one instantiation.
The back end is all together.
The whole thing. Okay. Second question.
The way the front end that's student facing, as we understand it, they'll only see your institution.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thank you. All right. The second question is, when you send out you're looking for the tech person, will you give as much helpful information as possible, since there's dozens of those tech people, if not hundreds, on campus, and I won't know which one to reach out to. Thank you.
We can ask them to specify exactly what type of person is the best person and just say, who do we ask for? Like, what title of person do we ask for? Yeah, that's good. Did you write that down, Nancy? Because I'll forget that.
Yeah. So just to do a quick illustration, and again, if I'm sort of speaking as a lay person on this, but Texas Tech has multiple campuses. So they have their health systems university center, but then they have IPE happening wherever there are healthcare programs at their 5 or 6 institutions within the sort of Texas Tech system. I mean, it's branch campuses at the Texas Tech University. So we said, well, we could do something like that, but from the project level. So the project level is their Texas Tech instance And then they have they populate by the institution, by the branch campus where there are those particular programs. So if you've got a student at a particular branch campus and the student has only access to those activities, then that's what the student can search on. And so we said, okay, well, we could take that same logic and say, essentially UMB is they jumped into the inventory, and we said, we following closely along was this IPE project. And we said, oh, yeah, because we were originally going to have you all just do a survey, to just like a static document that just fills out all your activities and would have to be updated sort of manually and all that. And then this inventory opportunity fell into Heather's lap, I think partly because you had connected with the Texas Tech folks at an IPE event. And we said, okay, is there a way we could jump into this to make this work that you're going to do to catalog really a living document, a living, entity that could be updated on a regular basis? So much more useful for all of you, we hope. And so in that spirit of the sort of branch campus way that they've got it set up, we thought we could start with the project instance, which is a UMB instance because UMB started it all. But that each of your institutions would then have your kind of drop down and you would click on that, and that's really your portal into putting your activities in there. So that's kind of the framework that we built. We thought through this with the Texas Tech folks.
And one quick thing before Dana asks her questions that kind of also goes into tab why we wanted it to be that way versus separate. Is that they have a really kind of robust reports structure that you can print reports from the inventory. So, from an accreditation standpoint, it sounded like it was going to be really cool that you could, if you're having, either accreditation for a particular discipline or for your university at large, you could go in and make reports to meet their needs to say, this is all we're offering. Here's how many students have participated. Here's the different disciplines that are participate. You can make very extensive reports to be able to use for your accreditation processes. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Dana.
So great question, Heather. So thank you. I was on the same line thinking about accreditation, but and without looking first at Texas Tech, what they've done, right? So my ignorance is big on this. So here's my question. I'm hearing the system, we're talking about student facing, right? Which again is wonderful in terms of getting students to make good informed choices, getting them into what we need them to do, supporting what faculty do. But I also would use this in terms of communicating with employers, right? Or so those constituents in the DMV that we work with. And I could be wrong. Is this not intended to communicate with them, and you guys can just tell me something different, and that's fine. Like that's
it's the badges that would communicate with the employers, the badges. And if we're going to engage in other sorts of things like adding them to transcripts or comprehensive learner records, this inventory is more of an internal management piece. Am I getting that right, Nancy and Heather?
I think so. So we're going to go over in a little bit that we're going to have these frameworks. So a framework for each of the 3 badge tiers. And in order to meet the framework, you're going to have a list of, like, each institution is going to have a list of this needs to be successfully completed in order to earn the badge. So if a student sees the framework, they're going to say, okay, I need to do check number 1. So they can go to the inventory to find opportunities that meet that check mark for number 1 and 2 and 3 and so forth, so that they, meet all the requirements. And then once they have the requirements for the badge, they get the badge. And that's what MJ's saying would then go on their CV or their LinkedIn or whatever. That would be what they communicate to their employers, the badge.
And so, just call me like the difficult person, not difficult, but like, and so employers in Maryland think this is a good thing? I mean, I think so, right? So I'm asking that as a, sonographic question, but I just want to make sure within the bigger project, we connect that somehow, and we'll do that on our end, of course, but I think that just keeps us, kind of a reminder that our students are, and I say the DMV, right? Not just Maryland. Again, it's, for many of us, it's a bigger sea pond that our students are playing in. But I just wanted to just ask that, and I agree wholeheartedly. We ought to be very careful and concentrate on our students. I'm looking for that other side to make sure we can make that good argument to those external constituents. So happy to help with that as the need arises.
And we have done, not specific to IPE, but we have in the past done some legwork, particularly with regional employers, on the value of badges. And it's been a slow process. Connie can tell you she's been, I think, from the ground level, talking about badges with IMS Global and a variety of other organizations that have been supporting this work. Employers are increasingly understanding what they are. And a lot of the value in the badge is what lies underneath them. So it's going to be that, you know, state or system-wide endorsement of the fact that these are, you know, IPE validated, you know, skills, and part of, you know, we would love to get an endorsement from IPEC to you know, validate the fact that we're you know, and we're having some conversations around that. But it's a really great question. And I think, you know, figuring out some sort of a communications campaign, because I'm not sure, and Connie can, glad you have your hand up, can probably speak to how much the healthcare industry has started to buy into these micro-credentials. But I think, you know, it needs to be both and. But one of the things that we decided early in the conversation, so this goes back to like 2015 when we first started this work, and with the career ready skills badging that we've been doing for undergrads, we did decide there was enough value at the very least on the student side and helping them connect the dots, that it was still worth our continuing to push on while employers start to get up to speed on this. But I'll be quiet because Connie's the real expert, and let her take over the rest of that answer.
Well, that might be a bit of a stretch. But you're right, MJ. I have attended some of our advisory committees we have 17, I think now, different healthcare programs. And overwhelmingly, the response from employers has been, yes, we want to pursue this. I did have a question too, if I could ask, out of curiosity. And by the way, I like the cat in the background there, MJ.
He's a dog.
Oh, it's a dog.
But I'll tell him you said hi.
Oh, well, don't tell him I called him a cat then.
Oh, he won't be offended.
But I'm just curious, and I don't know if you have the answer to this or not, but are they looking at, they meaning the group in Texas, looking at adding other groups to this registry? Do you know the answer?
You mean
to
like
that?
you mean like other universities?
Yes, yes.
You know, it's funny because when at UMB, we've been looking for a way to inventory our activities for several years. It's been something that drives me crazy because students always want to know what we're doing, and faculty always want to know how to meet with other faculty. And so we've been trying to figure out how to do that. And so I saw this at a, you know, conference or something, and I immediately contacted them, and we're their first. So will it go to others? I don't know the answer to that. And maybe it depends on how well it works for us, and then what they tell others. Like, look what we did with University System of Maryland. But we're the first ones. I'm the first ones that convinced them to let us use it. And they were very willing to work with us. So they may have others coming down the pike, but we are the first.
Okay. Well, to be honest, one of my first thoughts when you started describing this was, why can't we just take the skeleton behind this and do this on our own? But then my next thought was, if there are other institutions that will be joining this, what a rich database this would be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, so to kind of go to your question about doing it on our own, like I said, I know at UMB, we've been wanting to do something like it for years. And so when it already existed and I asked about it, just inquired about it, and they were willing to share, we kind of struck while the iron was hot, because then, you know, so we also have the opportunity in future years to be able to manage it fully ourselves, but we didn't feel like we had the manpower or the time to do that for this year, which is why Texas is still managing it for us during this first year or so. But we may break off and be able to do that on our own in future years.
Yeah, and it may be also that this single instance and branching isn't feasible beyond this sort of initial project. And it may be that each of you eventually just want to have your own instance, or you may decide you want to build a homegrown version, you know. you'll have your information. And so that's the most important thing, is that, you know, we want this activity that the spring is really focused around of taking stock to be something that really builds a foundation for you going forward in terms of having, with just a few clicks and really an awareness of what's happening across your institution, being able to achieve insights as to where you have some real depth and real exciting things happening. And then also maybe like, okay, you know, we don't have as many opportunities at the simulation level for these students, or we do, but they're all happening annually and our students need it more frequently than that. So that's the kind of first data that you'll get back from this experience, to be able to then make some meaning and thinking about where you might plug in some gaps, and kind of lay out a strategic plan for each of yourselves, kind of for the growth and development of your IPE work at your institutions. So that's what we're hoping this can really be. It's kind of an insight tool for all of you. So Lana, I saw, and then Connie, and then Dana, sorry.
Yes, just a question from a student perspective. Does the system, does it have the ability to track the activities? So will the student be able to tell, I've completed this activity or that one? And how do we know they're meeting the requirements for the particular activities?
No, this database doesn't serve that function. That'll be in a separate database. This is largely just to inventory what's going on at each institution, and a kind of clearinghouse, so everyone kind of knows what everyone's doing and where students can find things to do, but it doesn't track what's been done and what's been completed towards the badge. That'll be separate.
Right, and that goes back to that idea of the platform that would allow students to say, you know, so I'm a student trying to accomplish the tier 1 of the badge. I've been able to pull into my space within that other system, you know, the activities that I've done, the assessments that have accompanied those activities at kind of at the local level. So a faculty member might be teaching this piece and, you know, might be running a course on this. I've taken that course. Maybe my grade is what is pulled in as the assessment, or I've done some particular project in that course, and that's the assessment of that project is what I pull in. And then in that system, it would be, yes, Nancy has completed satisfactorily, that she's reached the competency that we've agreed upon for a tier 1 that allows her to essentially graduate to the tier 2 and move into the simulations. So again, we know that some of the institutions in this group have some of those platforms and technologies already. We didn't want to say from the project perspective, this is the one, but we'll ask you to sort of look around, talk to your folks at your campuses and see if anybody has anything going with badging technologies. And if not, we'll talk to you potentially about some options and work with you to try to create a mechanism for you to begin to have students be, and, you know, kind of, they get to catalog their own experiences through the activities as opposed to a catalog of the activities, which is what this is.
Who's next for their question? Okay, Connie, go ahead.
I know I put my hand down, but I thought of another question. I'm wondering if you've had conversations with them about encryption and data protection activities. I know that that's a really big issue right now here at CCBC and at basically every educational institution across the country. And that's one of the first things our IT folks are going to ask.
Yeah, the folks at UMB have already vetted that for their purposes. And there will be no data sharing. You guys will be entering data, but it's not like they're tying into your SIS or anything, or your LMS, anything along those lines.
One other thing to add on to Tab's comment about problems identifying activities that are one level at one institution and a different level at another institution. We in the inventory, when you're entering an activity, there's a little paragraph that describes each bucket. So 2 things. One, I would hope that just with that description, it would help for people to put their activity in the right bucket. The other thing that Nancy and I talked about, and I don't think we fully come up with the process, and this will probably be something this work group will decide, is that because somebody has to approve all the activities that are entered to make sure they meet their requirements. Because at the top of the inventory, it says like 5 or 6 different things. It has to be students from 2 or more disciplines. There has to be learning with, from, and about each other, whatever the, the criteria are for IPE. So at the end of the day, before it's put out there for students to view, someone has to give it the rubber stamp, like, yes, this is good. So we talked about, is that going to be me? Would it be beneficial to have one person at all the institutions looking at everybody's to make sure that that doesn't happen, what you mentioned? Or we can also have an individual at each institution that's doing it for their own institution, and I could be like consulted in a case of I'm not sure. So that'll be something we have to decide as a group, but I'm hoping that, we'll come up with a process to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Right, and I think some of it will depend on what the resemblance is. So it kind of, if the resemblance is around sort of content areas, but the level, the types of engagements that students have are qualitatively different and really demarcate something as a simulation versus an introduction, then I think that it bears some resemblance because it's, it's XYZ competency areas are being addressed and they're doing it around exploring the values and ethics associated with such and such. But if they're doing, the engagements are qualitatively different that would section it out into different tiers, then I think they would be distinct in my mind. But that might, what I would then begin to think about is if, again, once we could potentially envision a cross-institutional, maybe I could get some exposure at institution A and then I can move into simulation in institution B. So not everybody has to create all the simulations. It's like, how can we create some efficiencies in working together? And I just wrote a note to our team via email, so I would be sure not to forget, even though I have it in my notes as well, is Heather, if we don't have a place where we indicate activities that are fully virtual versus not, we'll probably want to have that, because virtual may be at least one way to think about scaling across institutions, because maybe those could be more readily made available across institutions if they're not place-based so much. So something for us to think about.
Go ahead, Tab.
If this is just for another conversation, that's fine, just say so, and I get that. I'm wondering about differentiated leveling where we've got what appears to be knowledge or level 1 or exposure. And we've got sophomore undergrads who it truly is that, but it also includes mean age 27-year-old physician assistant year 1 students. And that the maturity and experience level of the PA students who are at exposure level is a different level than the 20-year-old undergrads. And I'm wondering if you've had that experience at all, and if there's a way to deal with that, or if that's maybe not a concern at all, that I'm making a problem out of one that isn't.
So a couple things with that. We've struggled with that at UMB for a long time, trying to make sure we're putting the proper students that are at the right time in their curriculum together and not have them have the big gap. So I can work with each of the institutions to help to develop where you have the drop-down menu. Like if you click on your institution, it'll be all of your disciplines that are going to be potentially participating. So for UMB, I went so deep as to, for pharmacy, for example, I don't just click on pharmacy. I can click on 1st year pharmacy, 2nd year pharmacy, 3rd year pharmacy, 4th year pharmacy. So you could pick the type of student. Now I can say at UMB, the goal of the learning continuum is that you do the introductory bucket in your 1st year, whatever your program of study is, that happens in the 1st year. The simulation would be sometime in the middle, and then the practice piece or the competence piece would happen immediately prior to graduation. So for example, right now we have a course that's all virtual. That someone brought this up. It has 1,100 students in it. It's a foundational course at UMB that is all in that introductory bucket. And we don't have like nurse practitioner students in it exactly for what you just mentioned, Tab. They're so much more advanced than the other nursing students and even the medical students, because medical students are first year. And then we have nurse practitioner students that are already been practicing nurses, have already worked in interprofessional teams. It didn't fit. So they're not in that course. So I get what you're saying. And so we have some mechanisms to work around that within the inventory. And some of that might just be, we've had to learn a little bit just by trying different groups of students together at UMB. So, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about what students could potentially fit together, because there are definitely some that are a little bit farther ahead than others, depending on if they're already in a career and then getting an advanced degree. So it's a good question.
I think, and Connie, I want to raise your point in the comments as well. So I could also imagine, since this again is competency-based, not just you must click off 6 of these activities and therefore you've earned a badge. I could imagine, depending on who your students are, where they've come in from prior experiences, we get students who come in the 4th year and they've done amazing things at CCBC. And so they've already got a lot of chops in these areas. So if we had an end of tier assessment that's holistic across the different competencies that we sort of say are important to address at each tier level, if we had a holistic assessment for that, then a student could theoretically, if you sort of feel like it's like a placement, if they feel like they could start with that, show us that you've got the foundation, and then we'll move you right to tier 2. So I think there's some potential there to really try to, within reason of like what you can do like administratively and the number of people who would need to be watching this process, there could be a way to sort of customize it to students' entry points into your programs. So that's the beauty of competency-based versus simply you must complete the following 6 activities and then therefore get tier 1 badge. It's you need to show us the competency. And so if you've had prior experiences that can help you along the way, you may still have some things that you as an institution want to require all of your students as having done for whatever reason, but the competency framework doesn't necessarily require that. So I hope that this gives some flexibility as you begin to lay out all of your activities and think about who participates in them currently, and where you feel like there's some really good fit between what your students are coming in with and what they're doing in your activities, and maybe disconnects, that this is all the process by which you can really begin to work some of those things out if that's a need. And so, so the idea here is if there's some agreement about the competencies that would be addressed at level 1, at level 2, at level 3, there could potentially be opportunities for students to earn pieces at different places, and which could be really exciting. So I don't want to use the T word because of the actual credentialing piece, but students could transfer their development of their competencies, and having achieved the competencies in one institution, move that to another institution and start from there and keep going along the way. The other thing we haven't really talked about is leveling for undergraduates versus graduates. And so I think that there's lots of conversations that we can continue to have as we go through the spring. And, I think taking stock is a good first step, because that just helps you get your arms around what's already going on. And then we'll have a little bit of time to kind of address some of these things as they come up. But it's certainly things that we've thought about as well. But I really appreciate all these questions. I'm taking lots of notes.
Yeah.
And Dana, I want to be sure you had one chance to ask your question. Sorry, Heather.
No, that's okay. Who had a question?
Dana.
No. Oh, she doesn't have a question. Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say what we're talking about immediately after the break kind of answers some of this a little bit, because I'm going to show a couple graphics that might make it a little bit easier to understand what the competencies and the domains. So maybe this is a good time because we're right on our timing for that. So what do you say, Nancy? All right, so we're going to take 10. We'll resume at 3:40 and talk a little bit about the specifics of the badging project, and then a little bit about assessment.
I can hang out here if folks do want to ask any questions that I can capture over the break. And you'll hear my dog crying in the background.
Nancy, I'm gonna run and get a drink real quick. I'll
Please
be right
do.
back.
Oh yeah, don't feel the need to stick around.
Okay, I'll be right back.
What? What? I don't want to pick you up. I don't want to pick you up. I don't want to. No, I don't. Or Heather, if you want to share your screen.
Oh, yes, I'll share my screen. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so the next part we wanted to talk about was actually introducing sort of how the badge would work, which we kind of talked a little bit about. So this will just kind of illustrate that in the next couple of slides. So we mentioned the buckets and how they're very distinctive. I know that there was some concern about one university classifying something as an introduction and one classifying it as a simulation, but really, like when I read about an activity, very quickly, I know what bucket it's in. And so I hope, and again, I've talked with Nancy at length about providing guidance to the institutions as they're kind of starting to inventory to make sure that everyone's sort of on the same page. So I'm happy to provide any kind of feedback on these types of things, but the hope would be that we would all kind of inventory the same way as it pertains to the bucket. And then each of the bucket would become a tier. And so a tier of the badge. So when the first badge would be all this very kind of, I consider it like basic soft skills, introductory stuff. And then the second badge would be practicing that in a safe environment. And then the third badge is doing it with our patient population or clients or whatever, the verbiage that your students use. So then to get into another question about how we choose the competencies, sort of the next part of that is then here. Oh, did you want to say something, Nancy?
Just real quick. So I think we can also think about the 3 tiers. I don't know if I'm going to like a legal example, but it's sort of like, where is the preponderance of the activity? Where would that be located? If it's really, the preponderance of it is sort of really simulation, practice in a safe space, lots of constructive feedback, lots of opportunities to say like, oh, gee, how would I do it differently this time? Because I didn't do it I wasn't so successful the first time, or our team wasn't so successful the first time, with lower stakes, right? So you're not actually working with an actual client who is depending on maybe you having thought through some of these, roads that you don't want to go down ahead of that experience with the client. So it doesn't mean, for example, that in the first tier, there would be nothing experiential. It doesn't mean that it would all be sort of passive learning on the part of the students. That's not what we're suggesting at all. Really thinking about it as what do we need to lay the foundation and the groundwork for students to be successful as they grow and develop over time. So I want to be sure that that there's a sense that I think the activities that you have, it's what's its primary purpose? Where is the preponderance of the sort of emphasis going to be? Is it really laying a foundation? Is it really helping students to do some safe space kind of experiential feedback, support, training wheels kind of thing? And then it's really like, okay, the training wheels are off. You really launched out further into real world, more ambiguity, more different types of factors at play, and helping students to kind of navigate through that and understand how they're functioning well as a team in that kind of environment.
Okay, good. So then to kind of go to the next step after the buckets is to then think about the competency domains. So I talked about those earlier. The 4 domains are values and ethics, roles and responsibilities, communication, and teams and teamwork. So when you merge the 2, we've taken an introductory look, and this is not final, what I'm about to show you on the screen, and you're also not going to be able to read it. It's just for illustrative purposes. And to kind of get your brains on the same page as our brains as to where we could go with this, is that, each column here would be tier 1, 2, and 3. And so the rows are the 4 domains. And again, the purpose is not so that you can see exactly what the competencies are, but we thought about, as Nancy said, building a foundation in tier one with a specific skill, and then building on that competency for the second bucket, and then building on those first two for the third bucket. So let's just take communication, for example. In tier one, it was to choose effective communication tools and techniques, yada, yada. So learning about the tools that you use to communicate with the others. And then tier two was express one's knowledge and opinions with team members involved in patient care and population health improvement. So, and then the third was communicate information with patients, families, community. So it's kind of like you kind of take a skill and then you develop that further to the next, and then you develop that further to the next. And so what we tried to do was look at all the competencies. And I think we actually have 13 instead of 12, because there was 2 in tier 2 for values and ethics that kind of build upon each other, that could show a progression over the 3 tiers. Again, this is not final. It was something that Nancy and I just kind of drafted and thought would be a good starting point after this meeting, once we really get going with our planning. Because again, we do want to build these frameworks for all the institutions to go by, and any institution could most certainly have additional competencies that are covered by activities on their campus. But what we were hoping is that, you know, prior to initiating pilots, that as a unit, or we'd all agree upon a core set of competencies that would be kind of required for completion of the different tiers. So you can see in tier 1, there's 4 competencies. So you could, you know, have many other activities that covered lots of different competencies, but these 4 would kind of be like, if in order to pass that badge, you must have done an activity that covers these 4 competencies at a minimum. So that's sort of, you know, for a starting point for discussion when we meet moving forward, we thought we would put something on paper to kind of map it out. So I think there's like somewhere between 38 and 42 total competencies through IPEC, and this is like 12 or 13 of them. So that we thought were the most important, that could be built from tier to tier to tier. So with that, I think the next slide gets into assessment. So yeah, so I'm gonna take us off screen share for a second, just to see if you guys wanted to kind of reflect on what you just saw, or if you have comments on it or thoughts about that process that we kind of thought of.
I have a comment. It's thank you. It's I'm really excited that somebody has pared down which of the competencies we're going to focus on, since there are so many to choose from. And it's possible that you know, I'll just use Connie for example, that Towson might select different competencies under the 4 domains, leading to badges, and that they would fully differ than what CCBC chooses, such that students moving from one to the other place might find themselves having to start over at TU, even though they've demonstrated some competence at the community college. So this is really super helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. And this was Nancy and I, when we first started, we had all these thoughts that you're having, like, how are we going to say, if you get a tier 1 badge at UMB, that's equivalent to a tier 1 badge at Towson. How are we going to ensure that? And so we came up with identifying a core set. Again, it doesn't, at the end of the day, this is totally for discussion. This is just what over the past several months we've come up with as a starting point that we thought were made the most sense. But again, now it's yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so they're not set, and we're going to discuss it and kind of come to agreement, or you guys are pretty much set and we can go on to the next step?
I think it would be, if you had objections, or, you know, we would invite you to look at the longer lists, and you're saying, I'd really like to make a case. And I could tell you, I think it would be in level 2 or level 3. That would be helpful as well. We did see that we had 2 in that one box, because I made a case for the second one because it relates to cultural diversity. There's not a separate competency domain around DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And I'm going to step in and just say, like, on the behalf of the system, but not saying about the system, but, you know, DEI it's a complex area.
Sure.
And many of our colleagues and employers and students work in that field of longevity of aging, right? So, right, you guys know I'm the dean of a school of aging. There's like 3 in the country, right? So we got 1 here at UMB in the system. But when we think about that diversity issue, sometimes in terms of like thinking about employer, employee, how we do all that, it's very sensitive. It's very it is very centric based on the university your student is at. But I always wanted, so Nancy, when you were talking, we think about sometimes about age stuff, and we never talk about age. But when we talk about that kind of DEI issue, it's one of the things that all of these institutions have in common, and that do very well, including so many other things.
Well, and you see that language reflected across the 4 domain areas. So it seems as though IPEC has taken kind of more an infusion approach as opposed to having its own separate domain area. But you know, I made an argument that I think we'd want to have that visible in that across the, I think that was the value and ethics domain area, just to have where IPEC had it signaled it, we would want to include that as part of our core. So I think there's still room for you all to take a look at the longer list and say, I'd really like to make a case for X. And again, I don't think we don't want to get everything in the kitchen sink in there from the full list because it's too much. The other thing that I would say is that students are not earning a bachelor or a master's degree in this. They're earning a badge. A badge is a more bite-sized chunk. And so that's another rationale for why we went with essentially a core that was a subset. And Heather did spend some time really trying to parse out what would seem to flow developmentally so that a level 1 really could build into a level 2, could build into a level 3. We had that review process where I said, help me understand how these kind of flow. And so, but would invite you all, you know, we can share that document. I think it's even a Google Doc that we could share. So that you all could take a closer look at that. And then I think, Annika, our next round of meetings will be with individual teams. And so maybe that would be one of the sort of homeworks that you would each have as a team, is for you to take a closer look at that vis-a-vis the whole set of competencies. And then we can have those conversations institution by institution. We could take back your feedback and then do maybe a revision process then that would get us in kind of good shape for eventual potential pilots. I think, you know, that doesn't conflict with you all starting your inventories. And so again, that's why we wanted to get something in place. Heather's been really working at this quite intensively since she got the Elkins Award, but keep things loose enough and flexible enough that you'd have a chance for input, but also a way to just kind of roll up your sleeves and get started once we had this kickoff.
Boyan, you have a question?
Yes. First of all, I think, you know, thank you, Heather and Nancy. This is a great start. I think that's I love the concept of tier, you know, because not institution will be the same. My one comment and one question is that the question, have you thought about, in addition to the 4 core competency area, to have an overall area? You know, we developed a similar tool called IPCAS, the interprofessional perception, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And in addition to the selected 4, in addition to the 4 core competency, in which we went through and selected some kind of similar to what Heather did, you know, but in addition to that, we have an overall perception, you know, questions like, for example, individual in other profession respect the work done by my profession, or individual in my profession need to cooperate with other, and so forth and so on, you know. So that way, sort of like you have a core competency for all program, and then each program be slightly different, because we understand we have undergraduate and graduate here also, so professional degree program in different areas also. So sort of have a core, and then in addition to the core, you also have the like the required core and the elective core per se. So each institution have the common core, but also have the flexibility to add on, you know, sort of like an a la carte menu, you know. So everybody have a core. If you get a batch tier 1, in addition to that, you may have others. So.
Yeah, and we have talked about that, Nancy. I don't know if you wanted to talk about our discussion that we've had.
Sure. I really like that idea. I really like, so this is not meant to take away your institutional individuality and the sort of signature types of activities that you might have, or the things that you really want to say, UMES students are going to really do a deeper dive in this area, and that's a hallmark of what it means to do this work at UMES. Whether that becomes sort of a way of notating that within the existing 3 badges, or if that becomes a separate badge, I think that's sort of things that we can work out together and iron out. I think there's, again, as long as there's ways to lift that up and make that more visible when students have accomplished that special deeper dive in whatever particular area, or it might be out of these 4 areas altogether. You might decide that you did want a separate one for a DEI or some other, or you may want this with an emphasis in aging, you know, and as a kind of topical area, or, you know, I think we can think about how this might be customized around this common core as you've described it. But I really like that. I would just want to be sure that we can figure out ways for the students to really be able to showcase those things that they're doing. Now, we also know that they can showcase through interviews and resumes and all the sort of traditional ways of saying, you know, I was able to do a research project with Professor so-and-so, and we worked on a team, and here's what we did. And but the badging can kind of provide that validated set of experiences from the institution to say the students engaged with this at a level that was sufficient to suggest that they were competent at this level and could move on. But I really like that idea of having that ability for institutions to kind of say, here's our signature, and we have that as part of this. And Heather, I don't know if there were other things we talked about that I didn't.
No, that was good. It was like you said, you wanted the institutions to have the ability to have a little bit of, you know, wiggle room to do things if they wanted to have that kind of separate focus or additional items. But I think it went back to Nancy and I's concern about a tier 1 badge at UMB had to be equal to a tier 1 badge at, you know, at UMES or Towson. And so we needed to have that core set that had to be for everybody, so that we felt like there was applicability between the 2 institutions, that there was like a reciprocity. But then if you wanted to do something additional or more, there was that flexibility.
And we hope that these feel like competency areas, those statements that Heather had charted out in the 4x3, that really do feel essential. Like I would feel like we weren't doing our jobs well if we didn't have an IPEC experience for our students that didn't address those things. So it doesn't mean that every activity has to address every single thing, that there might be one activity that a student does that really focuses on values and ethics. There might be this really robust activity that students could say, you know, I'm actually hitting on 2 or 3 of these areas within a single experience. What I think we would ask for the purposes of assessment is that students, you know, it's made very clear to students, by the way, what you're doing here touches on values and ethics, touches on roles and responsibilities, touches on communication. We're going to ask you to demonstrate your learning in each of these 3 areas for this activity to be part of the badge process, because that's what we're really hoping to get out of this, is some sense of their demonstration of learning. So you may have an activity that touches on 3 areas, but you're only really going to assess for the purposes of badges on values and ethics, because students are going to get the other things elsewhere. So these are all conversations that you can have and that we can talk with you individually about and then come back collectively. So we have, again, team-based meetings next, and then we'll have a group meeting again. And we're going to try to really capture, you know, all of our thinking as we go along through this process with you, you know, and figuring some of these things out as we go. But yeah, I hope that we can come up with a schema that really makes sense for all of you, that you can really embrace, and that, you know, we'll be proud that all of our students who are graduating, who are coming through this experience with these badges, have really demonstrated this essential set of skills, in addition to potential other things that you would want them to focus on as part of doing it at UMES, doing it at UMB, doing it at UMBC, doing it at CCBC.
I think that's really great. And I'm sorry, one more follow-up question. I'm sitting here thinking, because I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but faculty. I think we all can smile. Before we did for the student, you know, at UMS several years ago, I think around 2013, we took a step back and also survey faculty perceptions also, because I think we all here, we all champion, we all preaching to the choir, we don't have to say that. But as we sit here and reflect, I would think that at least one of our faculty colleague who would be serving as facilitator, because in order for these IPE activities to happen, we need facilitator in addition to the representative here, one or three of us here, faculty buy-in is important. And I don't have to preach to the choir here. Do we have something like that for faculty, in which faculty are badging or deemed to be qualified to facilitate? Because we want to have consistency. We want standard. We don't want faculty at one school institution and faculty at a different institution do things differently. It may become interesting when students have more core and more, I guess, for lack of a better word, for more consistent recognition than faculty. I think we all can sit and think of that one faculty who may not be buying in IPE yet.
So I might start to get super nerdy about assessment. So bear with me if I get too far down that road. So potentially we're thinking of kind of both a distributed and a centralized model. So again, so that the burden's not on either one of those two things. So imagine you have, I'm just going to make it up, 6 different activities that speak to values and ethics at a tier 1. And you inventory those. Professor so-and-so teaches a real significant aspect of that in this class. Professor so-and-so over here leads a group, manages a student group outside of the curriculum, but they focus in on those kinds of things. I'm making up some examples. So theoretically, if they're already assessing students on this, then that can just go on as planned, provided that they're very explicit about addressing that particular competency in that activity. They might say, oh yeah, well, we do values and ethics. Well, show us. That's part of those sort of going through the actual approval inventory process. Is you've actually made that a very explicit thing for your students and you're assessing on that. And, course grades might do it, but course grades they're holistic and they might include things like participation and other types of activities, and we're assessing on other things. So it's typically a direct assessment of that particular thing through an assignment or an activity, something like that. So those might, with maybe just some adjustments to making sure everything's lined up, those might exist as they currently do. And those contribute to students, sort of developing skills in that area at level 1. Then if we come in and say, there's a final thing that students would do to sort of graduate out of that tier and really show us holistically that they've developed some competency at a foundational level around values and ethics. Maybe it's they respond to a prompt and write an essay. Maybe it's something that could be more multimedia. We can figure this out as we, because we're not piloting tomorrow. But maybe there's a shared rubric then that we could assess students on that would give us at least either levels. So, if you've reached a level 3 or above on this rubric, then that's considered competency and you can move on. Or there's some feedback about ways that you can get up to speed, because again, this is flexible. It's not the whole time of your degree. So hopefully there's a chance to, you're almost there. So go take a few more of these activities and come back and talk with me, or develop a specific activity that can address that one area, and then come back and you'll achieve competency and be able to keep going. So that's sort of the vision that we had with the BEST initiative around career ready skills, is that there would be an opportunity for a group of people at each institution to be trained on this kind of rubrics-based assessment. The scores could be normed, that kind of thing, so that there's some consistency across. And that we'd have some confidence with that sort of system or structure in place, that when a student passes out of that, and of course, because they're all doing varied activities at each institution and sometimes within the institution, right? So this is a way of saying, level setting and saying, okay, even though students took path A and some students took path B within UMES, they've all sort of had to respond to the same final assessment. And we said, okay, we've been able to see that they've achieved foundational competency, they can move forward. So that would be the idea. There may be other ways of approaching this, but that was our goal, was to have something that allowed many flowers to bloom and those existing assessments to be what they are. And then also have some assurance and some confidence that across the board, our students are ready to move to the next level and kind of grapple with these things at the higher level. That makes sense. So that was my little bit of a deep dive into sort of this idea of a rubrics-based approach. Heather had another idea that sounds almost similar to what you were talking about, which is there may be existing instruments out there that capture students' perceptions or some other aspect of this that we may want to bring in and say, we're going to do this all at pre-badging at the end of level 1, at the end of level 2, at the end of level 3. Or maybe we would do it with a subset of students and run it as a research project. So there are things that we can do that I think, and some institutions may jump into that opportunity and other institutions may say, no, we're good. So I think we can decide as a group, collectively, do we all want to have students take this perceptions inventory multiple times, or do we want to frame that as a research project, potentially try to get some funding for it, some other things like that, and then have a subset of the institutions might be interested in pursuing that. So I think there's lots of exciting possibilities here, and we can certainly continue to have that conversation as we go. Heather.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, so I want to turn it over to you to talk more specifically on the slides about the assessment, but Hoyan, to go back to what you were saying, and this could be discussed as we go forward, what Nancy's talking about is I work with some other folks in a Big 10 IPE group, and they are using the Interprofessional Socialization and Valuing Scale. It's called the ISVS, and that would be a tool that they could take before they do badge 1, after badge 1, and then after badge 2, and then after badge 3. So over time, you can track several items pertaining to like the value and the perceptions of the students to see if we are making an impact. Tab, it's called the Interprofessional Socialization and Valuing Scale. So I just Googled ISVS survey and it's the first thing that comes up. So I actually colleagues with one of the authors of that survey. And so they're trying to get it out a little bit more to be used at a more national level. So that could be a tool that we could, not specific to an item, but specific, to use before and after each badging tier to see how the students are progressing. So with that, I'm going to share my screen again and turn it over to Nancy to have a little bit more substantive discussion. Although, Nancy, I know we're running a little bit behind, so I'm not sure how much, and you kind of talked about some of this, so I'll let you.
I think I pretty much have said it, but let me look at the slide to make sure. I'm also Googling this scale, so I can stick that into the chat real quick. There we go. So I would, on that note, I would encourage all of you, if you have existing inventories or scales or surveys or instruments of any kind, qualitative or quantitatively focused, some aspects of this, doesn't have to be everything, let us know. We'll create a repository so that we can sort of say, okay, here's what we know about, here's where we, Heather and I, can go and put calls out and look for other things, if that makes sense. So that we can kind of know what we have at our disposal, what's available, ready-made, what's available that we might be able to modify and adjust for our own purposes, what we might want to grow locally, homegrown types of assessment tools. So we know that this is often our eagerness to get activities out there might get ahead of us in terms of how we're assessing it. And so we really want to help you all have your bench depth around assessment by the end of this project so that you can say with some confidence, again, when we showed that our students have accomplished these things, they're able to really demonstrate skills, not just, they haven't just participated in the activities. So I mentioned the idea of rubrics by tiers, so we would have a rubric or rubrics that would, for this end of tier type of final assessment, that we might have as a common assessment mechanism for across our instances of badge pathways that our students might participate in. So this, again, is kind of high level. It's not every specific activity that they would be participating in. That's really for you at the local level. And then I mentioned just now this toolbox of potential assessments for the utilization in specific tiers or with specific activities. And, if your faculty are already doing really wonderful things for assessment of XYZ, and they're willing to share, we'd love to be able to showcase that across our project as well. And so that may be something that we either do through literally sharing in a repository, or we may, maybe we provide an opportunity for a showcase, those kinds of things as we go forward in this. So we really are open to a lot of those kinds of ideas to based on, what we're hearing from you is what your needs are and what you think would be valuable to move your work forward. So I think I'll just leave it at that unless there's other questions.
One other thing that is potential, if we do create this toolbox of assessment tools, there's also on the National Center for Interprofessional Practice and Education, you can filter by type of experience, by type of skill that you're trying to assess for. And so we can pull some of those really highly utilized tools and put them into the toolbox. I've used several of them, but there's, I think, some 80 to 90 tools that are posted on that site, and we could pull down some of the most utilized ones and put them in the toolbox with some descriptions of what they're best utilized for.
And Heather, is that what this link is that I just put in the chat?
Let me see.
I believe so.
Oh, I'm still sharing my screen, so we'll see it together. Yes. So you can see here, these are the filters. So you can assess.
Yeah, I see tool. So tool might be.
I don't know if this is exactly.
This may not be it.
This
is FAQs.
Assessment. So under advancing, there's assessment and evaluation. This is it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you can, although it looks a little bit different than it used to. So anyway, there's a place in here where you can, oh, it looks like they've put it down to review it. But they show view measurement of student. This is it. Here it is.
Okay.
Right. So anyway, you can,
there we go.
Do a whole bunch of refinement on what you're looking to assess. And then, like right now, they have 50 tools in there. You can find a tool that would work best for your specific activity at your institution. But we can pull down some of the most commonly used ones and then put them in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next slide is you talking, Nancy, about forming the teams and next steps and such.
Yep.
Oops,
and I think we'll be able to do this and well be done by 4:30. So, we said, sign up, jump in. We're really excited. You did. But now we're going to talk to you about sort of more formally forming your team. And so many hands make light work is my sort of philosophy. If it's possible for you to have colleagues who might be willing to join in and give a little bit of their time, because I think this inventory process particularly could be something of a distributed model. People who sort of sit on a particular activity could be the one doing the inputting because they're closest to it and have the most detailed information. So that's something that you can think about after we go through the demo and you sort of really see more of the ins and outs of that inventory process. Who might be a good person to sort of potentially assign to that role in a particular program where there's a hotbed of activities? So you'll know that the best. And if you're not sure right now, then this is an excuse for you to have that kind of, to begin to ask those questions and sort of inquire as to who would be a potential point person for us in Department X or Program Y, who might be willing to work with us on the inventory piece of this. Because of course, that's our first big step. Your team may shift over time, and that's okay. You might have people who cycle on and then cycle off, and maybe that's actually more attractive to them in some ways, because again, everyone's busy. But you may decide that you want to periodically report out to everybody who's been involved, because it's a way to kind of keep the culture of this going and to really build that support across folks that you might engage in one way or another. You may find that there are folks, I'm thinking MJ's done a lot of stakeholder analysis in different meetings. There may be folks that you just want to be sure and keep in the loop, even if they're not actively involved. You may want to report out periodically. So you could consider them part of your away team as well. Excuse me, your home team. I'm going to mix that up. Your home team, as you're building out and thinking about all the folks that you might want to engage with this in one way or another. There may be more active engagement. There may be more on the, we're going to continue to brief you on this and keep you up to date on our progress. So the home team, again, can be larger than the group that would come here. We're really, for the purposes of ease of scheduling, we really are hoping for 1 or 2 people from each of your institutions to kind of run point on these central meetings, and with the expectation that you would then go back out and brief maybe the next concentric circle of folks that are on your core team, and then They may then decide to brief others, or you may do that in a kind of another more formal way. So all this is going to be whatever works best for you, depending on where these activities live and who you would want to engage around this in this conversation. We do need somebody from IT. So I've taken my notes and said, let's find out who the sort of the best possible person is amongst the many IT people who sit at your institutions to have in that meeting that we would have. And we would work really hard to make sure that it was scheduled at a time that worked for everybody. And if not, we'll record it, and we could potentially, I'm looking at Heather, someone like Matt from UMB might be made available for sort of 15-minute consultations if we need to have somebody kind of get up to speed. So we can troubleshoot if we need to, if not everyone's able to make that. Looking at my list here. So I think that's basically it on the team formation. So if you could plan on doing that sooner than later, because the inventory process will get underway, at least begin to form your team. Even if you don't have it fully set, that's okay. And again, it can evolve over time. I don't know who's running the slides, but here we go. Thank you. So Heather and I mapped out some meetings for this kind of first wave of work, which is really the taking stock wave. So again, we want to have this technology meeting for inventory access. I think Heather and I were briefly talking at the break. I think it could be something like 30 minutes or 45 minutes of a demo for everyone, for all of you, for the team leads, and then potentially your IT person as part of that. And then we might say goodbye to all of you, and then the IT folks stay on and talk single sign-on language with each other to get all their questions answered and get them ready to really do that integration. So maybe we would combine it in that way so that they see what you see, and then they can actually have the more specific technical conversation with the folks at Texas and UMB who have been in that conversation already. Then March and April, we want to have individual team meetings. So we would like to talk with you individually about how things are going. You could begin to start inquiring about activities even before you get access to the inventory. So consider that. We're happy to give you the big buckets if that's helpful to you, of sort of areas that you would be completing if we need that in advance. But some of this is just sort of making those connections into the programs and departments that are housing some of these activities, finding a point person, getting a sense of how many are we talking? Are we which students usually participate in those? Those are the kinds of things that you're going to be inviting them to formally input into this inventory. So you may want to start those conversations sooner than later. So we'll check in on your progress in March and April. Then we're going to bring everybody together in May to again, sort of just take a temperature check and see how we're doing across. Answer any questions that come up that would be of the benefit for everyone. June and July, we're going to go back to those team meetings again and sort of understanding that people want to take a break in the summer. There may be still some summer goals that you set for yourselves. And so we'll check in with you on those, see how that's going, with an idea of, within reason, because I know it's the start of the fall semester, we'll figure out a time in August where we can actually say we've really inputted the bulk of our existing activities into the inventory. And we've done some analysis of where there might be gaps, where there might be some real depth, and we're ready to really show the results of our findings and share those with the group. And potentially do some showcasing of particular activities as well, if that's of interest. And again, we can be flexible. We want to keep ourselves on something of a timeline to add some structure to the project. But if August turns out to be September, that's fine. It's not going to be December. I think we're going to keep ourselves at a decent pace. But honestly, if we've learned anything in the last few years, is that things can come drop on us that we weren't expecting, and things have to be adjusted, and that's okay. So this is our working sort of timeline for now. And then, you'll let us know as we meet with you in these individual meetings and as we go, how the pace is working. And we can always slow it down, or we can even speed it up if we want to. And then I think we might have one more slide just about next steps. So I wrote this before we met. So I'm going to modify this and say, we'll send you a set of things that this person needs to kind of be up to speed on. And then we'll ask you to send us the name of your IT point person so we can actually just put out a doodle poll for them, to participate with all of you around that demo meeting that we would have for the inventory. So we may adjust that March 4th deadline since we're going to send you a little blurb about the kind of person that we were looking for. And then set a schedule to populate the inventory. So work as a team to sort of think about, okay, how are we going to approach this? Are we going to go program by program? Or are we going to do tier by tier and start with, tier 1? Are we going to start with pharmacy? You all can decide this, but I would encourage you to start thinking about kind of your roadmap for the population of the inventory. And then we're going to hit you with a lot of polls for these meetings all the way through August. And so I would kindly ask you to jump on those polls as soon as you're able to and fill those out, so we don't have to have holds on our calendars for too long, and we can really just set those meetings. We would ask that at least one team lead be part of the shared meetings. So that's the sort of goal. If more, if you've got 2 team leads, great, you can both join us. For those for this specific institutional meetings, we'd love to have a few more people involved so they can just be listening in and feel that team cohesion. So we'll work with you to try to have a few of your colleagues who aren't part of these central meetings be part of those institutional meetings. Any questions? Final thoughts? Need this, I must say.
This was great. Thank you. Very helpful. Good guidance to know what to do for when we log off.
And Tab and you and some of the others on this call were part of making this possible to this point. So credit to you all as well for the hard work you've put in over the last year.
Yep. Well, a lot's been done beyond that. So thank you.
I'll modify that last slide before, but we'll share the back out too. So that those next steps will be actually somewhere in writing that you can have and access and share with your team. Looking at my list here, I've taken a lot of notes, so I'll also compile those things, and especially I've starred lots of things, questions to ask Texas, questions to ask, talk with Heather about, so get all of that compiled into one place, and then we'll feed you back as we learn new things and get clarification about certain things that you asked about. That if we couldn't answer them, we'll certainly share that out with you. We may decide to do a sort of an alias, an email alias that gets to all the team leads. Or we may just do it as kind of bulk email. We'll create maybe a project site somewhere, project space, either in Teams or something like that. We can figure out which one would be the sort of easiest for all of us to get into. And again, do let us know if you haven't yet who your 1 or 2 people are who will be your team leads, because that's primarily who we're going to be communicating with. So again, some of you may drop off our central emails. So we'll want to know your 1 or 2 in, if you could give it to us in this, say this week or the beginning of next week, that would be great.
Just want to say I appreciate the organization. The next step in the slide is very helpful. Thank you.
Sure thing. All right, well, we're just really so excited that you wanted to jump in on this adventure with us, and really excited to highlight and showcase all the great work that you're already doing, really take your work to the next level in thoughtful ways and with a lot of intentionality, and really to the benefit of the students and the eventual teams and environments and clients and patients that they're going to be working with. We're really excited. So thank you all for your time and attention today, and all your great questions. Take care.
Thank you.